and that kind of project, apprenticeships. This is, at the heart of this is actually a very Labour budget. It's the kind of spending you'd expect from a Labour finance minister. It's just on this massive, unprecedented scale. And that might make, as I say, that makes Grant Robertson either the luckiest finance minister of all time, because he can do all of the stuff without the usual criticism, or else he's the unluckiest because it's all on him to save the economy for the next year.
Yeah. So what are you thinking in 20 years' time? Will history be the judge, Tim?
Oh, mate, have me back on in 20 years' time and I'll tell you. We just don't know. There is no way, and this is if the last 8 weeks have taught us nothing, is that we just don't know. I mean, if the borders start to open in a couple of months to Australia and the South Pacific and then further afield, if a vaccine comes along, I mean,
yes.
then we've bought the time we need. If any number of these things that we hope will happen in the next 12 months don't happen, then who knows where we end up.
Certainly very interesting. Tim Watkin, good to have you on the program, and go and get that haircut, eh? I can imagine it right now. Not a pretty sight. All right, and that's very interesting, isn't it, Shane? We just don't know. He could be the luckiest finance minister or the unluckiest.
No, we don't know. And here is the thing, that if the economic hurt is really felt leading up to September the 19th, all of the good management, and I think we all basically agree that the lockdown and the emergency was actually handled pretty well, but all that will be lost if New Zealanders believe that the economic hurt is too high and there isn't a cohesive plan to get our way out of this.
I actually wanted to bring something else up, Heather, before Tim came on, and that is, smaller towns and regions like your Havelock Norths. What do you sense is the future? I mean, it must have been really, really hard and really tough, of course, for some of those small businesses in towns like Havelock North. What do you sense when you talk to people? Is there a sense of optimism this time, a year or 2 years from now? What do you think will happen?
I think people largely take things in their stride, actually, and just to correct you, I'm in Havelock in Marlborough.
Sorry, my apologies.
Havelock North might be slightly different. It's got really, it sort of borders on the outskirts of two cities now, but in the countryside, and particularly in the South Island, I think people are pretty resilient and they take everything in their stride. They'll vote the way they do at election time. I think that people have recognised that it's very unusual times and unusual circumstances and they have to do their bit. But they also worry a lot about the impact on the vulnerable and the small businesses, the hub, and such an important part of these small towns. So when they suffer, everybody does.
And that is true, isn't it, Shane?
It is true, and I've lived in Auckland for far too long, but I still view myself as a small town Kawerau boy. The rural folks, small town folks, are resilient. However, I did sense a sense of optimism as a result of infrastructural growth in the regions.
All right, okay, nice to have you both on, Shane Tepo and Heather Roy. Thank you very much for being with me on the panel. I'm Wallace Chapman. Now, Checkpoint, a special budget edition goes to 7 p.m. tonight. Do stay tuned. I'm back 3:45 tomorrow, Friday. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, the Finance Minister reckons he slept easy before his jobs budget. So what's in it for you? 50 billion goes into a COVID recovery package. The wage subsidy's extended for 2 more months, but there's new rules. Tourism gets a $400 million fighting fund to boost domestic travel and to ring-fence strategic assets. So what does that mean? The Tourism Minister is live. But safety nets don't come cheap. Our debt will more than double. Who's paying for that? And shoppers queue for level 2. And an Auckland barber does a mop chop every 4 minutes after opening his doors at the lower alert level. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. I'm Paul Brennan. A $50 billion recovery package is the heart of the pandemic budget as New Zealand braces for a sharp economic downturn. The hefty price tag promises to blow out debt to levels not seen in recent decades and deliver years of deficits. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The plan lays out an initial $16 billion of spending, including an extension of the wage subsidy scheme for the hardest hit businesses. Almost $14 billion has already been allocated, leaving about $20 billion unspent. The wage subsidy scheme, set to expire in June, will be extended by another 8 weeks for the worst hit workplaces at an estimated cost of $3.2 billion. The government will borrow a total of $190 billion over the next 4 years, lifting the debt burden to nearly 54% of the value of the economy. Unemployment is forecast to peak at close to 10% in the middle of this year, before coming back to just under 5% in 3 years. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The government will spend $900 million on initiatives to support whānau, hapu and iwi to deal with the fallout of COVID-19. The Finance Minister says today's budget recognises the significant impact of the disease on Māori jobs. Here's our Māori News correspondent, Lee Marama McLaughlin.
Today's budget includes a $200 million investment in a Māori employment package aimed at creating jobs in the regions. That fund includes $50 million towards Māori trades training. A total $200 million will also be spent on kōhanga reo, and whānau ora will receive a boost of $136 million to continue to deliver services to whānau at the grassroots. Ko Lee Marama McLaughlin, tēnei.
A big splash campaign encouraging New Zealanders to holiday at home is still a few weeks away. The government body tasked with rescuing the sector, Tourism New Zealand, was given an extra $400 million over the coming year in today's budget. It covers everything from advice to making sure private operators at key destinations such as Waitomo and Kaikoura don't go under. Tourism New Zealand head Stephen England Hall says there is also money for an advertising campaign encouraging domestic tourism, but only when this can be done safely. The Building and Construction Industry Training Organisation is enthusiastic about the budget's multi-billion spend on construction and trade training. The budget included $1.6 billion for vocational training and apprenticeships and $8 billion to build new state houses and for shovel-ready infrastructure projects. Warwick Quinn from the organisation says that covers all angles of the construction industry. In other news, New Zealand has recorded the third consecutive day of 0 new cases of COVID-19 today. The Ministry of Health says 2 people are still in hospital, but neither are in intensive care. Auckland Council's water company has applied to take 100 million litres more water a day from the Waikato River to help ease its shortage. Watercare has made an application to the Waikato Regional Council in addition to the 150 million litres a day it already has consent for. It's asked to extract that amount only during wetter months of May to September. During other parts of the year, it would only be allowed to extract water when levels were above average. Water restrictions come into force this Saturday in Auckland, banning the residential use of hoses and water blasters. A submitter to the Nelson City annual plan is asking if the council might reduce water charges now that people are having to wash their hands more. A Nelson resident, Trevor McKenzie, suggests that homeowners and businesses might struggle to pay higher water charges through having to wash more often. It's nearly 5:04. Sport this afternoon. The government has held off releasing details of further financial help for the ailing sports sector in today's budget. The Finance and Sports Minister, Grant Robertson, says support is coming, but an announcement is still a few days away, as Clay Wilson reports.
Grant Robertson indicated last month the government was working on a sports recovery package. Today's budget announcement confirmed that, saying the sector has been devastated by COVID-19. The announcement said details of the package would be announced in coming days. The support will be in addition to the $25 million relief package from Sport New Zealand confirmed last week. $15 million of that is short-term relief for clubs and regional bodies, who are being hit hard by a dramatic drop in revenue from gaming machine funds and membership fees. Last month, Sport New Zealand also guaranteed current funding levels for under-pressure national bodies would be maintained for 2021. This is Clay Wilson.
Julian Savea has become the second former All Blacks winger to leave French club Toulon this week and return to New Zealand to try to continue his professional rugby career. Savea's former Hurricanes and All Blacks teammate Nihi Milner-Skudder confirmed yesterday injury has forced him to cut short his contract with Toulon and sign with the Highlanders. Savea says he'd like to return to the Hurricanes but would also contemplate a move to Japan or a switch to rugby league. That's the news.
Back to level 2 and to a new normal.
The coffee machines are buzzing and the sparrows are back gathering crumbs off the floor at the cafes.
One was having a big breakfast, and the other one was having some eggs Benedict, celebrating being able to sit down in their favourite cafe for the first time.
Still very, very quiet in Foxton this morning.
There's even, dare I say, a notable increase in seagulls waiting to snaffle the last bit of pastry up at Jimmy's Pie.
Well, kind of.
And the Mayor of Queenstown has just swan dived off a bridge.
Expect the unexpected. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Short forecast now, taking us through to midnight tomorrow Friday from our Met service. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloudy periods, a few showers. Waikato through to Kapiti Coast. That includes Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine with high cloud, though. Isolated showers for Western Bay of Plenty for the rest of today. Wellington and Wairarapa, fine, high cloud today. Cloudier tomorrow with the odd shower. Nelson and Marlborough, fine with high cloud. Low cloud about Kaikoura Coast tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, showers in Westland and patchy drizzle developing in Bulla tonight. Showers spreading everywhere tomorrow. Canterbury, cloudy periods today. Cloud tomorrow, scattered rain. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods, a few spots of rain for the rest of today, fine tomorrow, apart from morning and evening cloud. Fiordland, rain easing to a few showers, then clearing during the evening, mostly fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, the odd shower for the rest of today. It's nearly 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to this extended program on Checkpoint. We're with you until 7. An historic budget and a shift to level 2. We will have the budget and the level 2 special up until 7 o'clock. Over the next 2 hours, we'll hear from Finance Minister Grant Robertson, Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis and National Party leader Simon Bridges. We'll hear from tourism operators and we'll take a look at the shift to level 2 and the haircuts and mall queues. But let's begin with the $50 billion rescue fund, which tonight sits at the centre of the pandemic budget as the country braces for economic carnage from COVID-19. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says it's a once-in-a-generation budget to tackle a monumental challenge. But the opposition says there's no coherent plan. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It was billed as no ordinary budget for an extraordinary time, and the numbers don't lie.
This is the most significant financial commitment by a New Zealand government in modern history.
Grant Robertson debuting a $50 billion fund to repair the carnage wrought by COVID-19. Yes, you heard that right. $50 billion. $16 billion was doled out today, another $14 billion already spent during lockdown. It leaves $20 billion in change, cash ready and waiting to deal with the changing crisis.
It is a once-in-a-generation budget. It is bold because the task we face is monumental.
And monumental may be understating it. Treasury's forecasts are eye-watering. Unemployment tipped to touch 10% by September. The economy looking at a year or more of deep recession. Never mind the cost of borrowing. The budget is set to blow out debt to nearly 54% of GDP by 2023, leaving the country in deficit for years to come.
This is the rainy day we have been preparing for. Now we must weather the global storm.
The fund includes an 8-week extension of the wage subsidy scheme for the worst hit businesses, a $5 billion public house building program, and free training for specific trades, think construction, for the next 2 years. But the budget's also notable for what's not in it. No election sweeteners, no helicopter cash, no major tax or welfare changes. This is a budget to keep the lights on.
We know this is not the end of what we need to do. We will keep working with you. We will keep supporting workers and businesses.
I say, Prime Minister, get Kiwis back to work unless there's an overwhelming reason not to. Put more trust in everyday New Zealanders.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says the government was slow to move to alert level 2, slow to reboot the economy. He says a $50 billion slush fund is no plan.
Spending money is the easy part. But Grant Robertson doesn't even today know how he will spend it all. It's not a plan. Much isn't allocated, leaving over $20 billion to spray prior to election 2020.
It was a rare mention of the election in what is an election year budget, but not like one we've ever seen before. COVID-19 has drastically changed the landscape.
He waka eka noa. We are all in this together.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
I spoke to the Finance Minister just before we came to air and started by asking him how he slept ahead of this historic budget.
Oh, yeah, no, I got a good night's sleep in last night. We'd finally put the documents for the budget to bed, and I woke up this morning feeling, that this was a very important day for New Zealand, and I'm really proud of the budget we've been able to deliver in what were pretty extraordinary circumstances.
So how different is the budget you delivered from the one that you had previously imagined?
Very different, in large part because we have a $15 billion further response in terms of our COVID recovery and rebuild that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And that's a big sum of money, but actually it's, a part of our ongoing response. There were some things that we weren't able to go ahead with as a result of having to shift gears, but we also did invest in those core public services and health and education and so on. So, I think we've got the balance right in this budget between looking after the things we need to for government services, but responding to support New Zealanders to get through and thrive at the end of COVID-19.
Let's get to some of the specifics. So the wage subsidy scheme, an extra 8 weeks relief, but that is subsistence for some of these businesses. They've got rent and overheads. What other long-term support will there be?
Well, obviously at the moment there's support for many of these firms through the small business cash flow scheme, which is specifically designed to be able to deal with fixed costs, and many businesses are signing up to that. In addition, alongside the wage subsidy scheme, if we're talking about the tourism sector, that's why we've put in our first instalment of money into the tourism recovery plan, $400 million, to start supporting those businesses to transition, to reorientate their business, to make sure we secure tourism assets, because we recognise in a sector like tourism, it isn't going to go back to normal, in fact, anytime soon, if at all. And so we've got to be alongside the industry and those businesses, helping them to adjust, helping them to get into that domestic tourism market. And so, we've got a package there that I think is the beginning of our work with the tourism industry. When it comes to retail and hospitality, this extension is aimed at them, and they are able to trade as we move into level 2, and then we hope to level 1 as soon as possible.
So that $3.2 billion, is it capped or could it go higher?
Look, I think you've seen all the way through this that we've been really flexible about the kind of contributions we'll make. When we first started the wage subsidy scheme, it had a cap. We removed that cap. We've changed conditions as we've gone. Even with this scheme, we brought in startups who weren't eligible for the original scheme. So we continue to adapt and develop, but we think this is a really important extension to help businesses who actually, and many of whom in the targeted sectors, are not even able to trade at this point.
But you're not ruling out that figure, $3.2 billion, could be pushed out higher if needed?
Oh, look, I've learned over the last 2 months to avoid ruling too many things out. One important thing to note, Lisa, is that $3.2 billion is an estimate. What we pay out on for the wage subsidy scheme is if you meet the criteria. And if you'll recall at the beginning when we had the initial wage subsidy scheme, we said it would be a range between 8 and 12 billion. So they're not targets, they're not limits, it's just the estimate for the number of people we think will be helping through the scheme.
You're holding $20 billion in reserve, not saying what you're going to spend it on at the moment. So could you use that for cash payments later on, maybe at level 1, so that people have got money in their back pocket to help stimulate the economy?
Yeah, look, the whole point in leaving $20 billion on the table is to be flexible. Every country around the world is in a situation where we haven't seen the full story of COVID-19 play out. And so we wanted to be able, we think it's the responsible thing to do, to be able to take some time to make those decisions. As I said, it's the rolling maul of initiatives. Our economic response to COVID-19 happens every day, not just budget day. So it does give us the flexibility to respond. We certainly are aware of the fact that, stimulus in the economy will be important. Actually, the wage subsidy extension will be part of that. So will a number of other initiatives, but we continue to work on what we can do to support households through this.
Yeah, but people listening are going to want to know, is there something else coming for them? So can you tell them, either way, whether that is still on the table, this idea of a lump sum paid out to households?
Yeah, look, I mean, we're taking a look at a range of options. The thing about that is it is obviously quite an untargeted one. Well, it's certainly been an option. I've said that for several weeks now. It's an option that we are considering. But what I was about to say was that as we move down the alert levels, our focus is naturally more on targeting those who are the most affected. But we certainly recognise that people, particularly those who are losing their jobs and people who perhaps have reduced hours, are vulnerable, and we're going to make sure we continue to support them. Those decisions will be made as we go, just as we have been for the last 8 weeks.
So $1.4 billion on trades and apprenticeships. Which ones are going to be free? Are they going to be on-the-job training, or will it be through institutions?
A mix of both, and in terms of the industries we're focusing on, it's construction, it's manufacturing, it's actually community and healthcare. It's making sure that the areas where we know we have some skill deficits, where we know we're going to need more people, that we get alongside those industries and support them. I mean, construction's a really interesting example, Lisa. When you look at what happened at the end of the global financial crisis, people lost their apprenticeships. They didn't get into those areas. And so when we did come back, and there was a recovery, we had a skills shortage. We're just not going to let that happen again. And if you just let me to add one other thing to that package, there's an important component here, which is actually to pay the equivalent of the wage subsidy to employers to keep their apprentices on board, because that was another legacy of the global financial crisis. The first people laid off in businesses were often the apprentices, perhaps 2 years through a 4-year apprenticeship. We are now going to be providing direct financial support to businesses to keep their apprentices on.
11,000 jobs in environment, killing wallabies, cutting wilding pines and pulling up weeds. Are you worried that we're stepping back into a low-wage economy with these jobs?
Look, I think it's important we have a range of different employment opportunities for people. These are things that will make a big difference to our environment and actually to our productivity. In many cases, people can get into the job quickly without having to be retrained, which means they've got an income, they've got skills. And so actually, these are important things for us to do. Some will be temporary, others will actually be permanent jobs. And, roles like fencing up our waterways to keep our rivers clean, making sure that we actually have functional tracks and huts in our dock estate. These are really worthwhile things to do, and people can get into the work quickly.
All of this comes at a cost, right? So the debt forecast is going to more than double from around, just under 20% of GDP to more than 50%. How are we going to pay that back, and how long will it take?
Well, what the budget shows is if with the 10-year projections that Treasury do, that we'll be reducing it down to around about 40% over that 10-year period. That's because the economy will be growing, and we're confident with the investments we're making that we will be reducing that debt over time. New Zealand always has debt, Lisa, so we don't actually pay off and get to zero. Michael Cullen did pretty well at getting close to that, but for the most part of our history, we have always had some debt to help finance what we do. But we do want to get ourselves back to a more sustainable fiscal position. But I've been very clear today, I'm not prepared to do that and sacrifice the livelihoods of New Zealanders as we go through it. You and I both lived through that in the late 1980s and early 1990s. There is a better way than that, and it's about investing in our economy to grow it sustainably to be able to reduce that debt.
Understand that, but we are going to have to pay some of that down. So are you going to revisit tax?
Look, we aren't focusing on tax at the moment. Our focus is on investing in people through this budget. In the future, we'll be looking at options around what we do with debt reduction, but our first and best place of doing that is to grow our economy, which means as a percentage, debt will be lower. And it's about getting a balance right in terms of doing that. We've shown we can be fiscally disciplined, but in the end, there's no point in saving for a rainy day if you're not prepared to put the umbrella up when it happens.
I know that growing the economy is one of the solutions, but at the moment you've got a closed border. Immigration was one of the big factors that fuelled our growth. You're not getting those people in there. We've got a number of low-wage jobs that have been created as a result of this. Your tax take is going to be down. So can we expect austerity at some point to pay down some of this debt?
I just don't believe in that, Lisa. I've seen the damage that does to communities. We have to be careful with our spending, and we've been careful as we've gone through the last couple of years. We have to be disciplined about making sure we invested in the right places, and I think in this budget we're doing things that will create high-wage jobs in the infrastructure area and construction and the digital sector and the agri-tech sector. We're putting money into those areas as well. But I think the damage we do to a society through austerity policies far outweighs the fact that we're carrying this debt. And bear in mind, the debt that we're now creating will still mean that we will have among the lowest levels of debt in the OECD. That's the legacy of what this government has done and what previous governments have done, and it means that we're better positioned than many, many other countries when it comes to debt.
And that was the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. No new cases of COVID-19 today as the country moved into level 2, exactly 7 weeks after we first went into lockdown. Queenstown rolled out the welcome mat to domestic visitors today as passenger planes flew in for the first time since April the 1st. The district has been reeling from thousands of job losses, with more than 5,500 people requesting welfare since late March. Visual journalist Nathan McKinnon and tourism reporter Tess Brunton were in Queenstown as travel resumed.
Hey, this I do for Queenstown. We're back.
Queenstown Mayor Jim Bolt welcomed the return of domestic visitors with a sunrise bungee off Kawaro Bridge with AJ Hackett Bungee.
2, 1.
I see the funny side of the fact that not too long ago we were worried about the number of flights coming in here. We haven't seen any for a long time and very much looking forward to these flights.
Hours later, the first passenger flight touched down in what was once one of the country's busiest airports.
Look, there's a lot of people out there going through a lot of pain at the present time. We need to remember those who have lost their jobs, those whose businesses are struggling, the migrant folk who may not be here in the future. A lot of pain. However, there's no point in standing around wringing your hands saying, woe is me. We're going to get on with it, and today is the day we get on with it.
The flight left foggy Christchurch this morning, landing in a bluebird day. Christchurch resident Tracy Hay was first out of the terminal, ready to help her daughter and grandson move house.
It's freeing. It's a bit weird to be allowed to do this, but to be in a different place from Christchurch is just amazing. And Christchurch has been great, but it's so nice to be here. So nice to be out.
Auckland resident Phil Bramwell booked a weekend away with his friends as soon as level 2 was announced. He says other Aucklanders won't be far behind.
I think Aucklanders are waiting to get down here. They can't wait. And I think there'll be plane loads of them very quickly following us, I'd say.
With a weekend of golf and hunting planned, he wasn't fazed by the changes to flying.
Social distancing was done really well, so we never got close to anybody, so it was all pretty safe, and I felt 100% safe.
Anthony Mortimer is happy to be able to support local tourism.
Everything's distant, so there's clearly 1 metre apart at least in all of the queues that you're in. There's no food open, there's no coffee open, there's no people close by to you, and the seats are very spread in the planes. So it's just it was a weird feeling really, and a kind of a unique thing, but it's great to be back, and I hope everything goes really well for everyone in Queenstown and it works out okay, because goodness knows we need this economy back up and running now. It's been too long.
Christchurch resident Matthew landed ready to head to his favourite restaurant, Fergburger.
It was pretty good, I travelled actually on the first day of lockdown as well, so it was pretty similar to that. So I had a bit of a warm-up, so it was like empty airports and sort of barren planes. It was quite nice.
He'll be in the area for the next few weeks.
I've actually come down to work down here. Yeah, I cut hair. Yeah.
And is there a big demand for cutting hair in Queenstown?
A little bit. At the moment, it's nationwide. It's pretty full on, It's crazy. But yeah, it's good.
Queenstown Airport Operations and Safety General Manager Michael Clay says it's exciting to see flights return.
Well, I think it's great for the airport and for the staff who work here and all of our stakeholders, but it's even more important for the tourism operators in Queenstown. And it's actually going to breathe some life back into their businesses and give them a bit of hope for the future, I think.
The airport would usually have about 40 arrivals and departures a day at this time of the year. Today, they had 4. Mr. Clay says it's a good opportunity to ensure their social distancing is up to scratch.
Very much a quiet, empty terminal compared to what people are used to. But hopefully, as we get the processes improved over time, we'll be able to increase the numbers and the amount of access to the terminal. And then we'll see the return of our food and beverage operators and and a bit more of a tourist sort of holiday atmosphere within the terminal as well.
That currently means no meters and greeters in the terminal. Jets from Auckland will start touching down on Saturday. In Queenstown for Checkpoint, ko Tasbrunton tēnei.
8 more weeks of the wage subsidy is not enough for one of the country's largest tour operators to stay afloat. Pan Pacific Travel's Managing Director is Matt Brady, and he joins me now. Thanks for being with us this evening, Matt. Give us your description of the budget.
I'm devastated. Absolutely devastated. Underwhelmed. To be honest, it's a crock. It's an absolute crock. We've been told that the tourism industry has been listened to and that it's been taken on board. I've yet to know any individual person that has spoken with the Minister of Tourism, despite him claiming to have spoken to so many people. We were very clear on what we needed. You know, the borders have been potentially closed to international visitors for a very, very long time. Now, let's define that. A lot of us are looking at that as being 12 months. We were very clear to say that if we were to see the recovery, long-term recovery of tourism, we needed certainty. And we were looking at saying, if you extend the wage subsidy to cover the core staff, the key staff, for the duration of the closure, we would have probably applauded that. We'd be given an 8-week extension.
So what is that, a short reprieve in essence?
At best. Well, in fact, for a lot of people, consider it a 4-week extension. And the reason I say that is that the hotel sector and the industry were desperately saying to the minister just last week or the week before, give us some sort of indication what's happening, give us a bit of a lifeline, but got told to wait to the date. Now, that was too late for thousands of people because a lot of people, particularly in the hotel sector, have had to give their staff 4 weeks redundancy notice. So guess what they did? They gave them 4 weeks redundancy notice last week. Because otherwise the wage extension.
So for this wage subsidy to make any difference to you, you're telling me that you need it to last as long as the border is shut?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
Without
an enormous amount
subsidy,
of money, Matt.
It is. But look at the impact of tourism to New Zealand. Over $17 billion. 400,000 people directly or indirectly employed by the tourism industry. Now, at the moment, we're being sort of told we've got this wonderful $400 million package, which I note with interest that recently Racing, who somehow managed to be given a bit of a lifeline before the announcement of the budget, have been given $72 million. I think at best they're claiming $1.6 billion. So $72 million. Tourism, you know, $17 billion gets $400 million. And most of that will be sent on a task force telling the sector how they can actually pivot themselves to actually get into the domestic or trans-Tasman.
So
that's like telling the kiwi fruit authority to start pivoting into growing broccoli.
Yeah, so
there's no comparison.
There is this campaign that is coming, which is obviously targeted at the domestic audience. How much is that going to mean to you? Well, to
the majority of the inbound industry, it will mean absolutely nothing because we're not involved in it. But let's put things into perspective. We, as domestic travellers, tend to fill from the bottom up. And I say we because I'm like every single one of the others. We'll go away somewhere and we'll stay with friends or relatives, or we'll put 12 of us in a batch or a tent at the back somewhere. We might go in if we're really forced to. We'll get into the motels, we'll get into the camping grounds. Hotels, by and large, have very little domestic leisure business. One hotelier said to me, at the end of the day, Matt, if I'm relying on the domestic market, I would be better in the morning to fill up a bucket of cash, open the front door quickly, throw that bucket of cash out and slam the door shut again. That's how much it's going to get out of it. Most of the big major hotels, sightseeing, major attractions, you must ask the question, why has an entity such as Ngāi Tahu, Skyline, The Heritage Hotel in Hamner Springs is completely closed. They won't reopen. And the reason is because they know that without a good balance and mix of the international market, they simply can't survive.
What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this, Matt? And you're talking really about what you see as an absentee minister. So what are you going to do about that?
Oh, look, at the end of the day, I've got to be brutally frank. At the moment, there's a bit of a groundswell amongst the industry to say we need a petition to say in the biggest crisis of our industry's history, we have no confidence in the current Minister of Tourism. Now, everybody who knows me will know how difficult that is for me to say that. I'm very apolitical. I'm very much a person that prefers to take a very diplomatic line, but I'm just absolutely devastated. And so I'm sorry I have to say this. Right now, the best thing that could do for us is we've got a Prime Minister who is covered by the global press. We're going into recovery mode. Here's a brilliant opportunity for our PM to actually step up, take over the role of Minister of Tourism and lead from the front, because right now the industry is feeling a complete and utter lack of support.
I appreciate your time this evening. That is Matt Brady, who's from Pan Pacific Travel. And we will be talking to the Minister later in the program. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, $400 million for tourism. Minister Kelvin Davis joins us live. National leader Simon Bridges joins us with his alternative budget and the end of Level 3 or the start of a Guinness World Record. An Auckland barber kicks off his first day in Level 2 with a mop chop every 4 minutes. We would love your feedback. Will the wage subsidy extension make a difference to you? And how will your life change under Level 2? Have you got plans for domestic travel? Let us know. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to Paul with the headlines now.
Thanks, Lisa. The Prime Minister says today's budget is a reflection of the extraordinary challenges facing New Zealand and the world. A $50 billion recovery package is at the heart of the pandemic budget, with $20 billion of that still available to spend. The wage subsidy will be extended for 8 weeks for the hardest hit businesses. There's money allocated for retraining and creating employment in various areas, including $1.1 billion to create 11,000 nature-based jobs. The tourism sector has been set aside an extra $400 million over the coming year, including funds to start promoting domestic tourism in a few weeks' time. The Finance Minister says the budget recognises the significant impact of the COVID-19 crisis on Maori jobs. The government will spend $900 million on initiatives to support whānau, hapu and iwi to deal with the fallout of the pandemic. The country's aid budget will increase by $55 million, much of it destined for the Pacific. It will be used to help tackle the virus and rebuild communities and economies in areas suffering most from the crisis. There are no new cases of COVID-19 and no deaths for the third consecutive day. The Ministry of Health says 2 people are still in hospital, but neither are in intensive care. Auckland Council's water company has applied to take 100 million litres more water a day from the Waikato River to help ease its shortage. Watercare has made an application to the Waikato Regional Council, in addition to the 150 million litres a day it already has consent for. And Queenstown Airport, one of the country's busiest, says it's thrilled to have flights touching down again under Level 2. 4 flights arrived and departed today, a tenth of its normal activity for this time of the year. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. You're with Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get down to business now with Giles Beckford. Giles, big budget day and big numbers here. So debt's going to increase. Who's paying for it and how are we paying for it?
We're paying for it. That's simple, and we'll be paying for it for many, many years to come. First of all, look, the numbers were eye-wateringly big, as you say, and it just emphasises what a hole the economy has fallen into as a result of COVID-19. And when we're looking at borrowing $150 billion extra over the next 4 years, that shows you the scale of the problem and the challenges that face the economy. And the government, of course, with its revenues going to be crimped and squeezed for the next couple of years, lower tax take and other duties. It will hit its income, but its expenses keep rising, and it's just bridging that gap with bond sales, which is how it will be raising the 190 billion between now and 2025. And how we pay for it? It will be paid back a little bit year by year. And it will keep going, not just our generation, but our children and our grandchildren, unless there's something magical. Now, these are big numbers. As a percentage of the value of the economy, government borrowing, the net debt level, will be more than half the value of the economy. And that's in 4 or 5 years' time. And the projection is that will only start to fall back to about 40% in 12 years' time, 15 years' time. So it's obviously a long-running program. As a point of comparison, after the GFC and the Christchurch quakes, our level of debt was up towards 30% of the value of the economy. So obviously you see there the difference in the magnitude of the hit our economy is taking. And I know some people are saying, well, how do we compare with other countries? Well, we actually are in a pretty good position. And it says everything about the state of the world economy, that even now, when we're talking about the debt being more than half the value of our economy, we're still down the bottom of the league in world terms. By way of comparison, Japan's debt is more than 200% of the value of its economy. Big powerhouses such as Germany, close to 100%, as is the United States, Britain, even Australia is sitting in around 40%. So from that point of view, you have to say, and these are all pre-COVID-19 levels, I should say, let me just make that clear. When we went into the crisis, we were sitting at 20%. So lots of headroom for the government to be able to play with. In terms of fiscal security, the government's really been left with very little choice but to go out there and borrow. And yes, it's a generational thing. We're spending now in terms of trying to safeguard jobs, infrastructure, create wealth again. These things take some time, they take money, and from that point of view, future generations will also benefit, not just ourselves.
Thanks, Giles. Appreciate your time. That is Giles Beckford, our business editor. Well, tourism got a carry-on full of cash in today's budget, but industry leaders say it's nothing compared to what's needed to keep them afloat. The $400 million Tourism Recovery Fund includes a domestic tourism campaign, a program to advise businesses, and funding to identify and protect strategic tourism attractions. There will also be a task force to come up with ideas for future tourism in New Zealand. But will any of these initiatives make up for the fact that our borders are going to be closed for a very long time? Well, joining me now is the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis. Good evening, Minister. We've been talking to a person in the industry and others, and they've described, well, one of them describes the budget as a crock and say you're not up for the job. What's your response to that?
Look, I refute that claim. This government moved quickly to put in place the wage subsidies, tax provisions and loan schemes, all of which the tourism sector has been eligible for, and that was tens of billions of dollars, and the tourism sector would have used many billions of that. And so we listened to what they had to say. Their number one concern was the extension of the wage subsidy scheme. We've listened to that. We've extended the wage subsidy scheme for 8 more weeks, and that will be a help to employers, and that will save jobs. But the $400 million that we've announced is just start. The Minister of Finance has said that this is the next wave of support for the tourism sector. The $400 million goes to a tourism sector recovery plan, which I've split into 2 parts. The first part is around tourism transitions, and that's to provide advice and guidance to tourism businesses who need to transition and pivot towards the domestic market, to help them with the upcoming trans-Tasman tourism scene, to help them to hibernate if they need to, or to provide advice on other options to them.
Okay. Well, there's a lot in there, Minister. I just want to address that bit first. There's a lot in there. Hibernation doesn't help you pay the bills, and that's what these operators are saying, and that they are having to lay off staff because the wage subsidy extension is simply not enough. 2 months is not enough. So they are saying while the borders are closed, they need you to push it out much further. What consideration was given to going 6 months, say, with the wage subsidy?
So we considered a whole heap of things, and this is where Cabinet has landed. But we have to be honest that we can't tie workers to jobs that will not be there in the future. And businesses will have to make some more tough decisions into the future. But what we're doing is offering advice and guidance to those who believe that they can manage for a while. We won't have the same tourism industry that we had previously, but we will have the bones of it and we'll come out stronger on the other side.
What's your forecasting telling you about how many businesses in tourism are going to go under?
We know that there will be something like 150,000 jobs lost across the economy. But tourism? The extension of the wage subsidy will help support and will prevent some job losses. But like I say, we won't be able to save every business and every job in tourism.
The operators are also telling us that domestic tourism just simply isn't enough to keep them afloat. For a lot of them, it's 20% or zero of their business. So where is the new money going to come to them in the money go round if it's only Kiwis travelling?
Well, the first thing everyone has to remember is that this is a global issue, and it wasn't a government's desire to close borders or other countries' desire to close borders, but this has been forced upon every country in the world. And, if people were looking for us to open borders tomorrow, well, this package just simply won't do that. We have to be realistic and be able to pivot to the domestic market. The numbers of visitors will be softer, but if anyone is holding or crossing their fingers and waiting for borders to open, we honestly don't know when that could be, so they must prepare their business for a domestic market.
So the International Air Transport Association is forecasting 2023 for a return to open borders and overseas travel. Is that what you're thinking, 2023, before we get people freely flowing over our borders again?
Look, it is way too soon to be making predictions about when borders will be reopened.
You must be working within some kind of time frame, though, in order to make these decisions. So what is the premise you are working on with the border? How long are you planning on them being closed at this stage?
Lisa, you've got to realise that there are other countries involved as well. We cannot open our borders and no one else is able to fly around the world. So this comes down to actually the global response to COVID-19. This is not the government imposing our border controls in isolation.
In terms of travel domestically, how are people supposed to get places? There are limited flights at the moment, high cancellations, and social distancing, as you would appreciate, has stopped one of our biggest bus companies from operating at level 2. Are you going to try and get them an exemption for social distancing on planes and on buses?
Look, we're expecting to ease into domestic tourism. People will have to make do with what is available. We can't force businesses to make changes to their business. They have to follow the guidelines to make sure that first and foremost we operate in a safe way that maintains the health of customers. I heard somebody say to me that they think that the Chatham Islands airlines should have an exemption and allow more people on that flight. And my response was, well, what that operator is then saying is that they're prepared to risk the health of 600 people on the Chatham Islands so that they can make a profit, and that to me is unacceptable.
What is this idea about strategic tourism assets, a protection program that you've announced? So you're going to identify attractions that are critical to our branding and protect them. Like what and how?
So a strategic tourism asset is a business that has positive spin-off effects to their community or maybe to their region. And if I can
you give us an actual example? Yeah, that'd be great.
An example is just north of Whangarei. Tens of thousands of visitors would pour into a little village called Tutukaka, where the tourism operator would take boatloads of people out to the Paulites Marine Reserve, where they could swim in pristine waters amongst millions of fish. Now, when that business does well, it has spin-off effects, positive flow-on effects to the cafe next door that does well, or to the local dairy, or the fishing charter, or the service station up the road. And we need to make sure that we can protect these strategic assets, and officials will work with them to develop bespoke solutions for those particular businesses.
So you're talking about picking winners and funding them?
Well, if they have exhausted all the private sector options available to them, or then we will work with specific operators to create bespoke solutions. But if we don't support those strategic tourism assets, well, then what they'll have is an effect to other regions. So if you take something like Kaikoura Whale Watch, Kaikoura Whale Watch actually brings tourists to Kaikoura, and if it wasn't there, then it would have a huge impact and a flow-on effect to the whole Kaikoura area, and we would see more job losses.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. That is Tourism Minister Calvin Davis there. Paul Button is the General Manager of Canopy Tours in Rotorua. Canopy Tours is a bit of an adventure playground, zip lines, swing bridges and canopy platforms. He's been listening to the Minister, Paul. We spoke to Matt Brady from Pan Pacific Travel earlier in the programme, and he described today's budget as devastating. I'm just wondering, Paul, how would you describe the budget?
I don't know if I'd use the word devastating, but it probably didn't fit the needs to a wide range of tourism businesses, no.
In what way?
The extending the subsidies is something that we were interested in, and it's not a long extension, and it's also does feel like it's a little bit later in the game. We've been through a sort of a restructuring process over the last few weeks, and our team's been on a bit of a roller coaster ride, an emotional roller coaster ride. So it is challenging for everyone involved.
What do you mean by that, the restructure? What did that involve? Were there job losses?
We're in the middle of a restructuring, yes, there are potential job losses.
What kind of numbers are you looking at?
We were looking at sort of a high percentage, like in the mid-80s of percentages.
Of your staff that are going to go?
Well, the wage subsidy will help them out. It'll extend them, and if we can have the wage subsidies to support us whilst we approach to level 1, because we're not operating in level 2, that'll be really positive. That'll be a really good thing for us.
Any thoughts on how many you will be able to hang on to as a result of the continuation of the wage subsidy?
A good portion, to be fair. We'll be good to have a good portion, and then when we get some business through the door, if a little bit of luck, we can keep COVID down as a nation, and then we roll into the next month into level 1 with a massive fingers crossed. That could be really exciting and really good on the team.
So how much of your business is overseas versus domestic tourism?
We're probably lucky in a sense, like we've got a domestic appeal. We're about 40% Kiwi and there's 60% international.
Right. So when the Minister is talking about launching a domestic campaign to get people to travel, well, is that enough?
It has to be. For now, it has to be. We have no choice, right? We can't magic people to come and land and do activities. And I know the economy's had a king hit, and we just need Kiwis to travel. I kind of feel like level 2 is not going to encourage a lot of travel, but please don't take my word for that. I want to be proved wrong. And level 1 is when it'll be game on. I know Tourism New Zealand wants to release a campaign that really ignites tourism at level 1, but we just need Kiwis to be told to travel freely without concern of COVID.
When do you need to get to level 1?
If we could get there, we're realistic, right? But if we could get there in 4 weeks, we'd be really happy as an operator.
And what if we don't?
It's the same thing, right? It's stretching a very small amount of money even further and further, and just more reductions of wages and the subsidy. I can't imagine there'll be more extensions, right? The budget's done, and after that it'll just be the same thing. We'll be back into that same routine of having to displace people or get more inventive in how we work them.
Paul, do you have confidence in the current Tourism Minister?
Do I have confidence in the current Tourism Minister? We haven't seen a strong figure at the head of the industry from government table. We've seen great involvement from Chris Roberts from the TIA and Stephen England Hall too from TNZ. But I did hear Matt Brady speak before. And I feel the same way. Like, we have this amazing leader, and the last government had the Prime Minister as the Tourism Minister, and maybe we could think about doing the same.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's Paul Button, who's the General Manager of Canopy Tours in Rotorua. It is 11 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen to hear your thoughts on the budget. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're really wanting to hear from you if you're in the tourism industry as well. Is that package enough for you? Shoppers queued outside malls this morning to celebrate the start of Level 2 with some retail therapy. Businesses that have had to shut up shop for the entirety of lockdown couldn't wait to get back into the swing of things today, and their customers were equally happy to see them. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Simon Rogers headed out to see who was shopping.
The start of Level 2 meant Chris Now-Chan was straight to the shops this morning.
School shoes, school bags and drink bottles. That's, if I didn't have to, I don't think I would, because I think it's going to be crazy today. But yeah, that's kind of why we're here.
She joined dozens of shoppers queued outside the doors of Sylvia Park before 8 a.m, the mall's reopening causing plenty of cause for celebration.
Welcome into Kmart Sylvia Park.
Shoppers were after the basics.
I'm going to get some stuff for my kid. So he's getting really cranky at home, so he just broke all his toys and everything, so I just need to get some new ones.
I just need a few gym clothes.
As well as the treats they'd missed out on over the past 7 weeks.
Getting our nails done.
Been waiting, excited about it. I'm a nail biter, so I was like, whole lockdown, I'm like, come on, I want to get my nails done.
Really excited about being out, whereas normally I'm like, can't be bothered, but today it's like, woohoo!
Back to normality, I guess.
But there were plenty of signs that normal doesn't look quite like what it used to. Physical distancing means limits on people in shops. Some have lines and security, others registers to get into stores, as well as sanitisers and occasionally masks. Sylvia Park Centre Manager Helen Ronald says it's great to be back in action, but health and safety remains paramount.
Obviously extra people within the bathrooms and around the amenities. We're also just making sure we're going through and doing high touch points during the day more frequently. It's just that rotation. We've also done something that they call fogging in the system. So it's actually where you go through and do all the high touch points with a product that kills 99.9% of germs, including COVID, and actually has a residue and stays on the surface for a few weeks.
They're using an app to keep on top of the number of people in the mall.
We've got a live counting system, so it counts everybody in and everybody out. When we do get to our capacity, or close to our capacity at 80%, it's going to send me a text and let us know that we're getting close, and then we can do a review and decide whether to shut it down at 80 or shut it down at the 100%. I think it can be some sort of normal, but I think people will expect it to go back to what it was, and it's obviously going to take a long time to go back to what it was, but we just want to make it feel like it's as normal as possible for everybody coming through.
Some stores here have managed to get rent relief but aren't sure what the future holds. For now, they're just happy to be back in business.
We're really missing the work. Finally, we're back to work.
We've been out for so long, so it's a bit weird coming back, but it's definitely exciting. I woke up early this morning because I was too excited to come to work, so yeah.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
And if you were listening to that on the radio, the video will go up online and on our Facebook page. And thousands of unruly mops and overgrown beards finally got the chop today. Huge lines formed outside the country's hairdressers, but some shop owners are concerned business could drop off after the initial rush. Nick Trubridge and Nick Munro visited some of Auckland's busiest barbers.
Very busy, Mike, very, very busy. Everybody need a haircut.
Sandringham's Alert Barbers has been open an hour and a half, but Segrenarian, dressed head to toe in PPE, is already onto his 25th cut of the day. And there's no let-up. 10 men sporting overgrown mops and facial hair sit and wait 2 metres apart as they wait for a trim. Michael Sholem is next in the chair. He's been looking forward to this moment.
It's been about 7 weeks now. Yeah, wasn't too keen on lining up at 3 a.m. Yeah, it's starting to look like an old hippie. So.
Intihab Alam and his son Ismail, both in face masks, wait outside the shop. Little Ismail's hair is almost over his eyes, while Intihab's beard has taken over.
You can see that the hairs are coming towards the eyes. Okay, it's quite difficult, okay, at home. So that's why we are I think today is the first day, and we just here after sending my elder son to school. We just come from school directly here to have the haircut for him and for myself.
The family will be back in line this afternoon.
You could see from my face, okay, it's pretty much messy at home also, okay. So after him, I will come in the afternoon with my elder son once he is out from school.
Andrew Duncan has also joined the queue. Duncan's dog was lucky enough to get a DIY trim during the lockdown, but he decided to stick it out.
The wife did his hair and I didn't think I wanted to let her loose on mine.
Down Dominion Road, about 20 people wait outside the barber room. Namdi Ike Chuku has made it to the front of the queue. He's here for a long-awaited beard trim.
I couldn't dare do it myself because I like it done properly. So yes, it was my priority. And I suppose from the line here you can see it seems to be everyone else's priority as well.
Ike Chuku has driven further than most to get over 7 weeks of facial hair growth tended to.
I came all the way from Red Beach. I know it's a very long way to here, but these are my barbers really. The guy that just popped out, he used to do my beards about a year ago. And then he left the last place to come here, so I kind of followed him all the way out here. So these guys are great.
Hamish Hunter has just joined the back of the growing queue. Wait times are lengthier than usual, so he and a mate have set up camping chairs. Hunter's long locks flop well over his eyeline as he removes his cap.
Yeah, it's been maybe a couple months, but yeah, back to work tomorrow, so wanted to get my hair cut so it didn't look like this. So the hat off.
Hunter and his friend Nick Turnbull decided to make a morning out of their first post-lockdown adventure.
We kind of had a look online, and anywhere you could book was kind of, a 2-week kind of wait for a cut, and we figured, get out here at 8 in the morning. We just went to Ralph's around the corner, had some brekkie, had a coffee, and came back around to the line.
Over in Epsom, Wayne Army Jubier is about to reopen. Hair by Wayne wasn't even a year old when the lockdown kicked in.
We're here, we're open again, and the next few weeks are just chaos, chaos, man. So now it's kind of like trying to make up for all the time you've lost, trying to, keep the business growing from that, but it's going to be a huge influx, and hopefully it doesn't drop down too much as well after.
The shop is pristine. One chair has been removed to create space. Clients wait in their cars before being waved inside, and beard trims are banned.
Seeing how much something like this has affected our business for such a big time. So now for all of us, it's kind of like, okay, everyone is really excited to jump back in, but it's also like we don't want to all jump back in and 2 weeks later we're on lockdown again. So for us, it's kind of like after 6 weeks, we don't know where we're at yet. We're just hoping that the virus is gone. But for us, it's like working that close to people's mouths and things. It's not something that we want to do yet. And it's still more than for us, it's for the clients. I mean, if we're cutting one guy's facial hair, another guy comes and sits down, there might be some sharing of bacteria, and that's something we just want to avoid mainly. I don't think there's going to be any days off for a long time, or any lunch breaks. I don't think that's going to be a thing.
Ahmed Jubier says demand for bookings has been huge. He used one word to describe the next few weeks: chaos. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And if you were listening to that one on the radio, do go back and look at it online. Some gorgeous pictures there from Nick Trubridge and Nick Munro. Well worth a watch. Let us know if you were in the queue first thing to get your hair cut. You can text us on 2101. On tourism, a lot of feedback here. Tom from Waiheke has given this a lot of thought and come up with a few ideas. He's suggesting 20% government travel voucher rebates on any travel or stays at hotels, motels and Airbnbs. Receipts sent to IRD, like charity rebates at the end of the year, with GST collected only at the cost of 7%, not 20% for the government. That's some ideas to get the domestic tourists flowing. Richard says, are tourism operators factoring in that Kiwis cannot travel overseas, so will be forced to holiday locally? That's a good point, Richard. I think they're also concerned about people losing their jobs and whether they won't want to spend money on travel. Julia Australia has got in touch to say subsidise intercity bus line rather than flying. We need to support sustainable travel. Small problem there at the moment. Intercity is not operating at level 2 because of the social distancing required on their buses. Makes it not worthwhile at this stage. Someone else says Calvin Davis may not have the best relationship with tourism. However, reality is simple. You can't flog a dead horse. The country now more than ever cannot afford to prop up unsustainable industries unless there is clear value down the track, e.g. positive environmental or social benefits. Kath has also got in touch to say a lot in tourism are not interested in New Zealand travellers, and they have set their prices aimed at overseas tourists. If they weren't interested in New Zealanders then, they should not be surprised if their accommodation/activities are not used now. And another person's got in touch to say, as a Kiwi that travels extensively around the country and overseas, the last place we ever go to is Queenstown. Overpriced and arrogant. He should ask himself why Airbnb is so popular, because our hotels are too expensive.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The government is describing today's budget as the biggest financial commitment any government has made in modern times. A $50 billion pandemic rescue fund sits at the centre, with the government leaving $20 billion of it unspent to be used when needed. The Finance Minister says while not every job and business can be saved, the government will do everything in its power to protect people and the economy.
It is a once-in-a-generation budget. It is bold because the task we face is monumental.
Grant Robertson says there is no sugarcoating the impact the crisis has had on the government's books, and forecasts indicate a sharp fall in economic activity and a substantial rise in unemployment. Greens co-leader James Shaw says one of the best ways to create meaningful, well-paid jobs quickly is by investing in nature. Budget 2020 sees a $1.1 billion investment to create almost 11,000 environmental jobs in regional New Zealand. These include jobs in pest control and eradication, weed control, and the control of wilding pines. Mr. Shaw says this will help people to continue providing for their families while the country weathers the economic storm caused by COVID-19.
This $1.1 billion investment will not only create jobs in our hardest hit regions, it'll help to ensure that future generations now and in the future have healthier forests, rivers and harbours. And it'll help to soak up a fair amount of carbon dioxide too.
The Green Party's James Shaw, one of the country's largest tour operators, says it's devastated by the outcome of today's budget. $400 million has been set aside for the tourism sector as it wrestles with a sudden cut-off in supply of overseas visitors. But Pan Pacific Travel's Managing Director Matt Brady told Checkpoint the amount came as a crushing disappointment.
It's an absolute crock. We've been told that the tourism industry has been listened to and that it's been taken on board. I've yet to know any individual person that has spoken with the Minister of Tourism, despite him claiming to have spoken to so many people.
Matt Brady says domestic tourism is simply not enough to sustain most businesses. A Christchurch retail worker says extending the wage subsidy will be a lifeline for her and her workplace. The budget sets aside up to $3.2 billion to give companies that have suffered a 50% drop in turnover an 8-week extension to the wage subsidy. Maddie Hum says her workplace has been greatly affected by the economic downturn.
I think I was meant to be getting it till the 25th, so if it was 8 more weeks, that would be amazing. We've had a lot of people that have been let go and lost so many hours, so I think that would be good to do that for some people, yeah.
Retail worker Maddie Hum. New Zealand's aid budget will increase by $55 million, much of it destined for the Pacific. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says it will help those suffering most from the COVID-19 pandemic. He says the increase brings aid spending to nearly 0.33% of New Zealand's gross national income. Mr. Peters says Pacific countries are facing extremely challenging times, and the funding will rebuild communities and economies. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already said much of New Zealand's aid spending will be pivoted to dealing with the fallout from the pandemic. The World Health Organization is warning the coronavirus may never go away and could be something the world simply has to learn to live with. The organization's emergencies expert Michael Ryan says people have to be realistic.
This virus may become just another endemic virus in our communities, and this virus may never go away.
HIV has not gone away, but we've come to terms with the virus, and we have found the therapies and we've found the prevention methods, and people don't feel as scared as they did before, and we're offering life to people with HIV.
The WHO's Michael Ryan. For the third day in a row, New Zealand has no new cases. It's exactly 6:04. Now, sport. Southern Steel coach Ranga Bloxham admits her side faces a brutal season when netball's ANZ Premiership resumes next month. To minimise the risk of spreading COVID-19, all matches in the 10-week competition will be played in Auckland. Games will be played over a 4-day period, with the Steel intending to fly north for each long weekend on a charter flight from Invercargill. Netball New Zealand is yet to release the draw, but the plan is to still complete a full season, with all teams playing each other 3 times. The results from round 1 will still stand. The Hurricanes say they're keeping an open mind about re-signing former All Black Julian Savea. Off contract with French club Toulon, Savea will return home in the next couple of months and told his brother Artie's podcast he'd like to get back into New Zealand rugby.
Ideally, yeah, I would love to be back with the Cairns brothers, and if that doesn't happen, then I'll see my other options, and it could be another franchise, it could be Japan, it could, even maybe the Warriors, I don't know.
Julius Savea talking about his options there. And that's the news.
This Saturday morning, philosopher Toby Ord on the risks the future holds for humanity. He's written a book called The Precipice. He says we're standing at it. Actress and novelist Barbara Ewing has mined her teenage diaries for a new memoir. And yes, we have the Batman, disease ecologist Jonathan Epstein, on tracking down bat-borne viruses. And also on viruses, Chris Smith is back. Join me, Kim Hill, Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
We are funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast through to midnight tomorrow, Friday, from our Met Service. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, cloudy with a few showers. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, that includes Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, fine with high cloud, though isolated showers for Western Bay of Plenty for the rest of today. Wellington and Wairarapa, fine, high cloud today, cloudier tomorrow, the odd shower. Nelson and Marlborough, fine with high cloud, low cloud about Kaikoura Coast tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, showers in Westland and patchy drizzle developing in Bulla tonight, showers spreading everywhere tomorrow. For Canterbury, cloudy periods for the rest of today, cloudy tomorrow, scattered rain as well. Otago and Southland, cloudy periods, a few spots of rain for the rest of today, fine tomorrow, apart from some morning and evening cloud. Fiordland, rain easing to a few showers about now, then clearing during the evening, mostly fine tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower for the rest of today. 6.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and we're with you until 7 o'clock this evening with our Budget and Level 2 special. As we heard earlier in the program, this year's budget was turned on its head and the COVID-19 pandemic forced the Finance Minister to leave some things on the cutting room floor. Among them was reducing the cost of going to the doctor, and the other is tertiary fees. Grant Robertson told me there would be no second year of free tertiary fees.
Not in the immediate future. We've targeted that to the support we've just been talking about with respect to free trades training and apprenticeships in those critical industries. We'll have another look at that policy in the future. Obviously, the current first year free carries on for future students, but we will come back at a later date to whether or not we extend that out.
So gone for the moment, the second year.
We're not going to be able to bring it in 2021. We've decided the most important focus at the moment is those critical industries, getting people into training and apprenticeships there. In the future, we may be able to revisit that, but it won't be for the 2021 year.
And that was Finance Minister Grant Robertson. Meanwhile, the extension to the wage subsidy gets a thumbs up from the National Party leader, but there is a but. The scheme will run for another 2 months with beefed up criteria. Businesses have to show 50% losses due to coronavirus, up from 30%. It's part of a $50 billion COVID recovery package. But Simon Bridges says if he was Finance Minister, there'd be more from business, including a plan. I spoke to the National Party leader a short time ago and asked what he considered the best bit of the pandemic budget.
I liked a few bits and pieces, but I suppose the one I would highlight would be the extension of the job subsidy in a targeted way. At high level, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do.
Did it go far enough?
Look, in truth, I think we've got to look at the detail on that. I think you can make a case for other bits and pieces in it that they have their worth. I suppose...
Sorry to interrupt. It's an extension of 8 weeks up to $3.2 billion.
Yep. Yeah, and, I think we have to look at the detail of design and work out whether it's sort of pitched exactly right or it's a little too generous or not quite generous enough. I mean, I think that's good. I actually expect to see more in the way of a business support and a plan. I look at this overall, and I suppose what concerns me most is that we're taking a $50 billion problem, we're making it more like a $140 billion problem. That all has to be paid back. And I think inevitably under a Labour government that will mean more taxes, or if not, certainly a legacy of effectively mortgage on our children and our grandchildren.
In times of crisis, though, the national government has spent too and taken on more debt in order to keep the economy afloat.
Sure.
So how is this different?
I'm absolutely not making a case against debt. I suppose what I'm saying to you, though, is spending is the easy part. You do have to pay it back. And as I say, whether it's a $40 or $50 billion problem, that's a significant problem. GFC and earthquakes was about $50 billion of borrowing for the last national government. We didn't need to because it was at that level. Increased taxes, and we got back to a stronger economy from good economic management. Here, though, the borrowing is nearly 3 times that at $140 billion. And indeed, in terms of the $50 billion fund that Grant Robertson has put in place, $25 billion of that, he can't even say what he's spending it on in the lead up to the election. And so I sit there and say, yeah, there's the spending. That's the easy bit. It will mean a lot more debt. It's too much spending, I think, in that regard. And what is critically missing is the plan for jobs and growth. I just don't see that there.
OK, so then, let's hear your budget then, the alternative budget. What is the number one thing that you would have done that this government hasn't in this budget? Specifics.
So specifically, I think you'd see us, and it's not all money, we end the lockdown sooner and get to a position where, unless there's an incredibly good reason, people are back working, because it's so much easier when jobs is one of the top issues here to keep someone in a job than to see them on the dole queue and then try and get them back.
So you're saying go to level 1 now?
Pragmatic. Well, I think the levels thing is a misnomer in a sense. 4, 3, 2, 1, you can make your points. I think it's much more about actually what can people safely do in a 1 or 2 metre world. And that's the second bit of our plan. It's a 5-point plan. That's about ensuring that there's some pragmatism, if you like, a sense of can-do for businesses. So it's businesses creating sustainable jobs because they've got a confidence, they know the rules, they've got certainty. And again, I don't think we saw any of that detail here. We saw the spending, the borrowing and the hope, but not the plan.
So going to a different level isn't a budget. That's about the alert levels. So in terms of a budget that you would present as an alternative, name me one thing that you would have done today that this government did not.
Yep. We would have invested about $9.5 billion more into businesses directly, most of that in cash flowing them through the GST refund scheme I've already announced that we would want to do. That means up to $100,000 per business and a low interest loan attached to that for some of the bigger businesses. That would do much more for business, frankly, than anything we saw in this budget. I'd also be much more serious about accelerating depreciation or expensing for businesses, writing a lot more of that off, up to $150,000 per piece of equipment and so on. Because again, that's about getting the private sector doing it. I'll give you a very tangible example of the contrast here. In this budget, we saw well over $1 billion go into pest eradication. That may be a really good thing. I know people will feel passionate about that. I can get that. But in a sense, they're not the sustainable jobs, they're government jobs in the way that actually a SME or a larger business, because they feel confident about the future, because they've got those pragmatic rules, they know it's a pro-investment environment, them going out and creating long-term jobs. That's the way over a decade you have a much stronger economy and country with good livelihoods, and we just, I keep repeating it because it is important, I will, we didn't see that plan for jobs and growth.
So the suggestion that you just made then about the cash grants and low interest loans, you announced that before the budget.
Yep.
So have you got anything new that you could add?
You will see more. I mean, I think in reality the opposition has the position of being able to see what Treasury's numbers are and going through them. But you will and can expect to see significant growth ideas and plans rolled out by National between now and the election, and you won't have to wait too long to get a sense of that. I mean, Lisa, I said in my speech in Parliament, and I say to you, I got 3 priorities for big spending: health, education, and then really just it comes down to one question: does it save jobs and create growth? That's where our priorities for investment would be. Lots of other nice to have things can be there, and you saw that in this budget, but our focus would be on those things I've just mentioned to you.
Okay, if we can get specific, would you have given helicopter payments, cash payments for people to go out and spend as a way of kickstarting the economy?
I have some scepticism of that. I mean, I do think the cash that's required is directed at businesses that have real problems. And yep, the wage subsidy is there, but the problem with the wage subsidy is it doesn't cover those other costs in the here and now that businesses have, whether it's rent, whether it's rates, whether it's other expenses. So I think you would have seen an approach where the cash and the assistance primarily went into businesses. Now, would there have been a families package in some way? Yeah, I think for National, we certainly, you will see that before the election. But helicopter cash, I have some scepticism. I don't know that just, getting a plasma TV, paying off some of the mortgage necessarily provides the targeted, clear stimulus we need at this time to create that jobs growth environment for the future.
That was the National Party leader, Simon Bridges there. It is 15 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Brett O'Reilly is the Chief Executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association and he joins me now. Good evening, Brett. Can you give the budget a grade, A being stellar, E not so much? What would you give it?
I think we'd give it a B. I think it's positive the government have recognised the scale of the challenge and the sort of borrowings that we're talking about are unprecedented in modern times. Some good short-term stuff, but as I think a number of people have said, not really those long-term initiatives that give us a sense of confidence that we're really going to be able to get back on our feet. I understand some of that because, they haven't had a lot of time to prepare this, but there's a lot more detail that I think we need before it can get any higher than a B.
So specifically, the 8-week extension to the wage subsidy, is that enough?
I think it's a good next incremental step, but no, it's not enough. The government themselves today said that they still haven't landed on a scheme to deal with what we know is one of the biggest issues, and that is around commercial property. The issue between landlords and tenants. It's been talked about for weeks. We still don't have a solution. We've suggested that we follow the Australian model, but still nothing. There's been some incremental change, but not fundamental change. So I think we're seeing some incremental shifts along, today. Obviously, some big announcements in other areas like vocational training and education. But for businesses, they'll be pleased. Of course, not all will qualify for that because it's only if you've had if you lost 50% or more, and still some major question marks around these key areas.
So what more do you need? When you say you need long-term surety, what specifically was missing for you?
Well, I'd like a sense from the government about, what they think they'd like the economy to look like in 12 or 24 months' time. And various commentators today talked about Treasury seeing the recovery as being quite rapid. Okay, so where's that going to be? What are the areas that we think are going to drive that recovery, and how are we going to prioritise those areas? What's tourism going to look like long term? What do we think? It's clearly not going to recover to the pre-COVID-19 state. In fact, there were signs that it was already coming off some of its peak. So what does that look like? And And so it's that strategy that I think we're all looking for. We're already working with the government in a number of areas and sectors like export and manufacturing. But I guess a high-level strategy is, I think, what people are looking for. Perhaps that'll come during the election campaign.
How comfortable are you with the level of debt that we're looking at? We're looking to, more than double the percentage of GDP we have in debt, from 20 to over 50 at its worst. Are you comfortable with that?
Look, I think the hard part of answering that question is knowing where's the $20 billion going. Because if you knew where all of that money was going, then I think you could answer that question. But I think until we see that plan, if we knew that money is going to absolutely transform New Zealand's infrastructure, if we knew that was going to significantly improve New Zealand productivity, make our businesses more competitive, and that enabled the economy to grow at 5% plus over the next 10 years, then I think you'd probably go, okay, well, yeah, I can wear that debt because I know that actually I'm going to be generating enough cash, which will come from business in terms of tax, to actually pay it off. But at the moment, it's just a big number, and it's not clear how we're actually going to be able to pay that debt off. And that's what I mean about needing, a strategy and needing a bit of a broader look at what we're achieving. We understand what the cost is of recovery, but we don't understand on the other side of the ledger what sort of revenue we think we can generate to pay that off.
I think you were listening to Simon Bridges while you were waiting to come on the program. Are you any more convinced that there is a master plan within the National Party?
I think their 5-point plan has some really good stuff in it. I think there was some clever elements to that. But I think I would challenge all the political parties to say, what does New Zealand look like for you in the next 10 and 20 years from an economic perspective? I've often been reminded over the last few weeks of Sir Paul Callaghan, who just before he died in 2011, talked about New Zealand's over-reliance on tourism, the fact that it is a cyclical industry, and that we needed to really focus on investing in the industries that would generate higher skilled jobs. Many of your listeners will know that I've been heavily involved in the tourism industry, so I'm not down on it, but we've been heavily reliant on it, and that over-reliance has probably seen the impact of COVID-19 be so severe for New Zealand. So what's that plan?
Well, Brett, on that note about tourism, should we just cut some of them loose? If they're not sustainable, then no more wage subsidy for them, and we just accept that those businesses are not necessarily New Zealand's future. It sounds harsh, but is that what you're saying?
Well, I think we need to have a strategy. And if that strategy said that we were too overweighted in tourism, and we sent that as a clear signal to business, then people wouldn't invest in it. But instead, it's been a bums on seats strategy, and the more people we've been able to get into New Zealand, the better. With lots of pressure on infrastructure as a result of that, which has been well reported over the last few years. So, what's our long-term strategy? What does a sustainable tourism industry look like in New Zealand? And how do we want to grow some of the other sectors so we aren't quite so reliant on one industry and and be subject to those cycles? So I think New Zealanders deserve that strategy, and I think there have been people like Paul Callaghan, a lot cleverer than me, who've been calling on it for a long time. So now's the opportunity with this situation to reset. And that's what we've been asking for of all the political parties. That's what we've been suggesting as part of the transformation and recovery ideas. And that's what we'll be holding them to account for over the coming months as we move towards a general election.
Thanks for joining us. That is Brett O'Reilly, who's the Chief Executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association. Whether it was a much-needed catch-up with a friend for coffee or a dash to Toy World for a belated birthday present, Wellingtonians were out in force today as retailers opened for business. Our reporter Logan Church and videographer Sam Ralston have been out speaking to business owners and shoppers today. And Logan joins us from Courtenay Place as restaurants get ready to welcome customers back inside for the first time under level 2 tonight. So Logan, how many people are wafting about out there?
Well, it's certainly a lot busier than it has been over the past 7 weeks. There are restaurants right along Courtney Place that have reopened. Many have been forced shut for the entirety of the lockdown. Of course, we saw an increase in activity when we went to alert level 3 and some of those takeaway options became available, but there's certainly more people out and about. Back to pre-COVID days? Definitely not. There's certainly many restaurants that are looking quite empty, even despite the social distancing rules. However, eager shoppers, though, were certainly a welcome sight to those business owners. However, some are worried that the retail rush that many saw today won't continue for much longer. For the past month, Lower Hutt's retail districts resembled a ghost town. But today, the first day of Alert Level 2, shoppers of all ages filled the streets.
We've been to Toy World and what have we bought?
PJ Masks and Lego.
We've come here twice while it's been closed just to show them that it's closed, because that's how Desperat's wanted to come and get something. And it was his birthday yesterday, so I said as soon as the shop opens we can go.
Up the road, Queenstown Mall is back open, a steady stream of shoppers coming in and out. Meanwhile, barbers along the main drag are dealing with long queues of bushy-haired people desperate for a cut. Restaurants and cafes are also, for the first time, setting up outdoor tables and chairs and welcoming patrons inside. Among them is Michael Gray of Buzz Cafe. He can normally fit 80 people inside his establishment, but social distancing rules have meant many of the tables are stacked at the back and a new takeaway waiting area established.
We're probably around the 40 mark. In reality, maybe 50, but we could be pushing if we did 50, but I don't want to push the envelope, but we need every person in here to make it work. 50% down on turnover is what I'm predicting.
At the front door, customers sign in, using pens sitting in a drinking glass that have all been individually sanitised. In some ways, lockdown has been tough for Michael, but he is trying to come up with innovative ways to run his business.
It's been hard. It's been hard financially. We've got debt, and we're trying to work that out. So every person comes in here, it's like, yay! It's been a little quiet start this morning, but I'm glad it has, and I just hope that people get into that habit. They've got to change their habits again now. I mean, a guy this morning, he sort of came in, and I would normally shake his hand. I know him, And it was like, whoa, the old elbow. It was different, but we're getting used to it. And that's what it is. It's the new normal.
Down the road, Christina Hall has reopened her colourful bake shop, Cupcake Sweeties, for in-person sales for the first time today. Lockdown also presented a challenge for her, with a large part of her business, classes and retail, unable to operate as normal. A business lifeline came around Mother's Day.
Normally Mother's Day, we'll pick up a few orders, but it's certainly not a big day for us. And we were absolutely floored. We had hundreds, in fact, it was well over 2,000 cupcakes that we decorated that weekend. Over 700 macarons went out. And we never have these sorts of volumes going out.
To run her small store safely, Christina has put strict rules in place to manage people coming in and out.
Maximum 2 customers at a time. We're not accepting cash at the moment, and we've got our register to make sure we are recording contact details. We will see how that goes, and we'll see if customers are observing it and make adjustments where we can.
Back in the city, Wellington's Cuba Street is buzzing. Hundreds of people are here shopping, all while nervously trying to keep distance from others. Checkpoint spoke to retail store Ico partner Rose Bollinger prior to lockdown, and she and her business partners faced uncertain times. Now, though, a sense of optimism as people come into the shop, keeping inside square duct tape boxes her staff have laid on the floor to keep people apart.
More people out in the street, maybe not that many people buying yet. I think people are coming to grips with their new reality. People are kind of almost waking up from a daydream. People are in their little shopping groups, which I believe they're allowed to be in, and they're kind of being considerate of each other. I think most people are being kind and being supportive of each other. Of course, there's the odd one out, but yeah, I think in general that's maybe our Kiwi spirit, I don't know.
But what these business owners do know is that they are going to have to rely on people wanting to shop locally to survive the economic fallouts from COVID-19. some of those social distancing rules has proven a bit of a challenge for some of the businesses out here, especially those in smaller buildings, many who might be used to having a lot more customers than they would be allowed now. We've visited restaurants and cafes today, which have had many of their tables left stacked in the corner as they manage those strict social distancing guidelines inside the establishments, which has proven a challenge, and many business owners are worried that in the long term this will have quite a big effect on their bottom line. I mean, in that story you heard from one business owner expecting a 50% drop in income over the coming weeks and months. So certainly a lot of challenges ahead. However, everyone we spoke to today certainly had a sense of optimism in them. They were stoked that they were able to reopen, and for many people in restaurants and cafes and even in the retail spaces, they're here to talk to, it's a people's business. They're here to talk to people and interact with customers. So they're really stoked to be back up opening and I guess coping with the new normal as we go forward.
Thanks, Logan. That's Logan Church joining us live from Courtney Place in Wellington. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, $900 million has been set aside in the budget for initiatives to support Maori to deal with the fallout of COVID-19. The Ministry of Health looks at sourcing more flu vaccines from overseas as the rush to get immunised outstrips supply. A political brawl breaks out between the Australian government and Queensland state government after the state government says it will bid for Virgin Australia. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. First, here's Paul with the headlines.
Thanks, Lisa. The Prime Minister says today's $50 billion pandemic response budget is a reflection of the extraordinary challenges facing New Zealand and the world. The World Health Organization is warning the coronavirus may never go away and could just become another endemic virus present in our communities. New Zealand has recorded no new COVID-19 deaths or cases for the third consecutive day. And Auckland has applied to take an extra 100 million litres a day from the Waikato River, in addition to the 150 million litres it already takes to help ease its water shortage. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Thanks, Paul. And you're with an extended version of Checkpoint. We're with you until 7 o'clock this evening for our budget and Level 2 special. The government will spend $900 million on initiatives to support Māori to deal with the fallout of COVID-19. The package includes $400 million on a Māori education, a $137 million boost to whānau ora, and $200 million on a Māori employment package targeted at the regions. Dr. Matt Rothscrooge, a Māori senior lecturer in economics and finance, told our Māori news correspondent Lee Marama McLaughlin that he expected more for Māori businesses.
For targeted Māori funding, overall I was a bit disappointed. It felt like a lot of the money that was in there for Māori was already earmarked pre-COVID-19. I didn't feel like there was an awful lot of thought put into how to pass money over to Māori organisations to help them find on-the-ground solutions from the Māori economy and Māori firms. In saying that, $200 million isn't a small amount of funding. It's probably at a level that is going to make a difference. I don't think it's going to be enough to make the level of difference that we perhaps need, but it is certainly a good start. And I'm expecting further spending, probably on the Māori economy, among other interventions over the next year. So I don't think this is the full and final say on spending for the economy during COVID-19.
The Māori employment package there that has been announced, are you pleased to see that that is focused on the regions? Is that where it should have gone?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a real concern for me that Māori and the regions are probably going to be the hardest hit in terms of employment and the slowest to recover. The $200 million for the regional economy will certainly go some way to supporting Māori regional economic development. The devil's going to be in the detail. There are lots of regions in New Zealand, and when they say regional, that could be disproportionately focused in regions that have, say, a strong dairy farming community. which might well be needed, but it's not going to specifically benefit Māori in the same way that maybe if that is put into things like forestry or into some of the border regions.
If we look outside of the targeted funding for Māori, what do you make of, I suppose, the flow-on benefits for Māori from things like the massive investment in shovel-ready projects, the investment in tourism, of course the extension of the wage subsidies will be welcome too?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I haven't caught the full detail of the extension to the wage subsidies, but it looked like that was still relatively limited. It was a surprisingly small pool of money. There's definitely some signals there that business is going to have to start fending for itself sooner rather than later, which was a bit of a surprise. I think the government has perhaps hoped that the Māori economy is going to get caught up in that big spending package. And you can see, I think that's why there was less targeting. They've gone for a pretty big, we're just going to inject money into the economy broadly, and hopefully that will benefit everybody. Yeah, time will tell whether we see that. I'm hopeful. I think there is definitely room for optimism in all of this, but at the same time, we need to be a little bit careful to make sure that there aren't communities, towns, rural areas that are isolated and forgotten in the recovery story. We don't want to see rural towns, say down the East Coast, neglected or forgotten in all of this recovery and in all of this spending, but then remembered when the inevitable austerity starts to kick in as we try to claw back some sort of fiscal surplus.
Despite sourcing an extra 400,000 flu vaccines this year, New Zealand still might not have enough to cover all its vulnerable groups. The Ministry of Health has admitted it's working to source additional vaccines to meet the increased demand this year. But GPs say it needs to improve both its ordering and distribution of the flu vaccine to ensure high-risk groups are looked after in the future. Charlotte Cook reports.
The ministry says by the end of next week, an additional 220,000 doses will have arrived in the country, bringing the total to 1.76 million, a third more than last year. It says normally the doses ordered would have been more than enough to cover requests, but the global COVID-19 pandemic has caused the demand to jump beyond usual seasonal levels. The College of GPs Medical Director Dr Brian Betty says despite the extra orders, there will still likely not be enough to cover the people that need the protection most.
We're probably going to run short of vaccine for everyone who may want a flu vaccination, and also in order to vaccinate those high priority groups that really should be having the vaccine. So the situation at the moment is we probably will run short.
Dr Brian Betty says as the numbers of stock currently stand, that won't be enough for everyone who both wants and needs a jab. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says drug buying agency Pharmac is looking to source an additional supply of the Northern Hemisphere variation of the vaccine. He says that process is still being completed and doesn't have the same protections.
We sought advice on this, and very clear advice from our experts was a vaccine that covers some of the strains is better than no vaccine. And this one, they've adjudged it's a perfect match for 2 of the 4 strains, and for a third one it would provide some protection. So again, their advice was it's better than nothing, and I think that's a really good option for us to have if we need it.
Director of the Immunisation Advisory Board, Dr Nikki Turner, says both variations of the flu vaccine could be prioritised.
When that vaccine is secured and arrived, that will be available for the healthy, well population. And in that way, we can ensure to protect the current supplies of vaccines for the high-risk groups.
She says doctors are currently working to prioritise those who need the vaccine the most. But moving forward, there needs to be a change around the flu jabs rollout.
I think we need to order more and expect more and know we run the risk of having extra supply. Secondly, we need to figure out a better way of distributing so that we ensure that those who are at high risk are able to get the vaccine first. That would mean probably a longer period of time where the vaccine is only available for those at high risk.
Dr Betty agrees. He says a lot of work needs to go into the estimates and forward planning for next year's vaccine.
I think there are problems with the way the distribution system works, and I've been in the system for the last few years. We actually ran short of vaccine last year. I think the Ministry is very, very aware of the problems in the system that need to be fixed so that we don't get a repeat of this happening next year. That's probably the critical thing that needs to happen. There needs to be a change in the way vaccine is distributed out into the front line and where that vaccine goes to.
Both Dr Turner and Dr Betty believe the pandemic has changed the way people will think about having a flu vaccine in the years ahead. For Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
Last week we told you about Denmark's success in fighting the coronavirus outbreak. Businesses there have been open for weeks and Jacinda Ardern has even shared ideas with the Danish Prime Minister. Schools in Denmark reopened a month ago and have strict social distancing rules in place. The BBC's Jean McKenzie visited one to find out how those rules are enforced.
It has been hard to not hug each other.
She says you can't hug each other, so you have to hug yourself. That's why.
Keeping kids apart requires some imagination.
We're not worried about the virus at all. When they came back, we had lots of activities to try to make them not worry. But they did worry. So we had to give up on that.
It wasn't needed.
Not at all.
The school's been cleverly redrawn, so each child only comes into contact with a very small number of other children.
Normally they sit 2 and 2. You have the class of 20. It's been cut down to 2 groups of 10. That's why you have the plastic.
Because those 2 groups aren't allowed to mix.
No, exactly. When they're going outside in the breaks, we have to divide those groups into even smaller groups.
So the kids just have 4 other children that they're allowed to play with, and they're only given one part of the playground that they're allowed to be in.
My name's Sky, I'm 7 years old. We keep our distance when we play. You can't play catch.
What do you play instead?
We hula hoop.
And there's a lot of this. How many times do you wash your hands a day now?
5 to 6.
Denmark reopened primary schools very early on. It was feared the infection rate would rise, and initially it did, but it's back down again. And with so many parents in work here, this was a targeted risk.
If we had to get the economy moving again, then we need to get the kids back into not only schools but also daycare to try to enhance productivity for those forced still to work at home.
It was a challenge to do your job while having him home. It's much more easy for me to concentrate, have a row of hours where I can just work.
A lot of parents wrote to me that they had some kind of concerns, and few parents that are so concerned that they wouldn't let their child come in the first week. After 2 weeks, they've rejoined and it's been no problem. Actually, it's the kids down there at home who said, why can't I go?
This, they said, was impossible. Children, social distancing. Now, it might not be school as they know it, but they're making it work.
It's a very beautiful Danish song, actually. The direct translation is when the light returns, it's back. The light is back.
And that was a package from Jean McKenzie of the BBC. A political brawl has broken out between the Australian government and the Queensland state government after the latter said it would bid for Virgin Australia. The airline entered voluntary administration almost a month ago after Canberra refused a bailout. But now Queensland has emerged as a potential surprise buyer. The ABC's Tom Iggulden reports.
Bids are due tomorrow for the ailing airline, which is in administration after crumbling under the weight of a $7 billion debt bill. With half of the Brisbane-based operator's 10,000 staff in Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk's state government says it'll enter the fray to try and buy the airline. Cameron Dick was appointed her treasurer earlier this week.
There are a lot of business interests circling the company. Some of them aren't necessarily going to put Queensland's interests first, and that's why I have to initiate this project to ensure Queensland's interest can be protected the best it can.
Queensland-based federal politicians are less than impressed. Agriculture Minister David Littleproud's calling the move a brain fart. Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton's calling it crazy and tying it to the state election due in October.
Anastasia Palaszczuk has brought Queensland to the brink of bankruptcy, and she's now talking about buying an airline. I mean, it's dangerous. And if it's a political stunt, they should pull out of it now.
And he's offering more free political advice if the state government goes ahead with its bid.
And they need to be honest that the money that they're going to use, at least in part, apart from further borrowings, will be the superannuation funds of nurses and police in Queensland. Now, is that a prudent way in which to invest your superannuation money? I don't think so.
That comes after the Prime Minister just last month urged the Transport Workers Union Superannuation Fund to invest in the airline. State Treasurer Cameron Dix retaliating against Mr Dutton's attack.
He's got enough trouble with cruise ships. That's the form of transport he needs to worry about.
That's a reference to the Ruby Princess debacle, which Labor says is Mr Dutton's fault. Mr Dix says his only focus is keeping the airline in the skies for when the virus emergency passes.
Graham Samuel, former head of the ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, who has said quite clearly today, we need a second airline. We need a second airline in this country, whatever form it takes. And I'm not going to take lectures from Peter Dutton.
Caught in the middle of the slanging match is the Federal Transport Minister, Michael McCormack.
I'll let them have their little discussions between themselves. So as the Portfolio Minister, I'll just say we've got 24 or so hours left before those preliminary bids can go in. Let's see what happens. I want to see two commercially viable airlines. I think that's so important for commuters, so important for the thousands of workers that Virgin employs.
But he's also making it clear that he'd prefer to see a fully commercial winner emerge from the 20 or so bidders expected to make a play for the airline.
They're a government, and I agree with Deb Frecklington. They should stick to trying to run Queensland and Queensland's economy. I think this should be left to companies, should be left to potential bidders and investors who aren't necessarily government.
And that was Australia's Deputy Prime Minister ending that report. It is 6:45 and you're with Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Let's return now to tourism. And Wendy van Lieshout is the CEO of Active Adventures in Queenstown. Her business has been in operation for 23 years. She's unable to operate under level 2. And Wendy joins us now. Wendy, a $400 million package announced for tourism today with a campaign aimed at domestic tourism. What use is that to you?
Well, look, some of those bits and pieces will help us, but I think it's just a little bit lacking for those of us who've actually already pivoted and made a change in our businesses. What we really need is some form of funding that will help us get going. We probably fall between the cracks a little bit. We don't fall under the Tourism Asset Protection Program, so we would really like to see some more support for people like us.
So how much of your business is domestic versus international?
Well, currently 100% of our business is international, so we're very quickly pivoting to try and pick up Kiwis and also Aussies if the bubble comes off. Will that get us through? Hopefully just perhaps on survival, but we have relied on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of North Americans primarily coming to New Zealand for the last 23 years, so it's going to be tough.
When you say you could hang on, maybe, how long for?
That's the tricky question. Obviously, the wage subsidy today will help us scrape through a little bit longer, but a business like ours is all about the people, and we're desperately trying to keep them tethered to our business, and that will be our success going forward. If there is no international summer into New Zealand this year, as in over the Christmas period, we will really struggle to return to the same business we were and we are now.
You must in your head be thinking there's not going to be international tourists through to the end of the year at least.
Yep, definitely. And look, we also operate in other parts of the world who, if they open up before we do, then we have some opportunity to also operate there if we can, but that's a lot trickier and it doesn't quite bring in the same amount of dollars as New Zealand does. So we're very much in strife here. And like I say, the scary thing for what's been delivered is that it misses people like us out. We bring together we deal with 120 New Zealand tourism operators to bring together our product for international visitors. So we're also keeping them ticking over. And it's going to be extremely, extremely tough for people like us.
Wendy, we've had a lot of feedback on this issue, and some people are saying if you're an unsustainable business, then it's tough, but the government shouldn't throw good money after bad. Some of the other comments have been that operators in Queenstown are arrogant and they haven't built up reserves with domestic travellers. What would you say to people who think that?
Okay, so for starters, we've been, as I say, operating for 23 years. We have been profitable and we do have reserves, and that's why we've been able to retain our staff to date. There is no arrogance here. We're not a Queenstown operator. We're nationwide all around New Zealand, and our job is to bring people to New Zealand to enjoy the entire country. We're not, even though we're based in Queenstown, that surprises me a little bit, those sorts of comments. And as far about throwing good money after bad, we have brought hundreds of millions of export dollars and income and taxpayer money into New Zealand over the last 23 years, and we've been extremely successful. We just want to keep that going, and if people like us don't exist, who is going to bring those people?
When was your last international tourist?
Our very last trip the last tourist left a couple of weeks into lockdown. They were caught here, one couple in Auckland, but our last trip was literally disbanding as lockdown began.
And all your bookings would have disappeared into the ether, no doubt.
Yep, absolutely. And that's thousands of passengers. So for those people who think that's not throwing good money after bad, that's definitely not the case in our case.
What are people doing about next year? I assume you would have had some bookings out into next year. Are people cancelling those, or how are they reacting?
No, we, as you can imagine, over that period of time, we have a very high repeat customer ratio. So we've managed to rebook people into next year. But the tricky thing now, of course, is as that time lengthens and there's less opportunity for potentially bringing people to New Zealand, we have to start thinking about how we can cater to those people. So we are making plans, but that's one of the things I think that annoyed me a little bit about the tourism transition program. We've been consulted to death. We're done with that. We don't need any more advice, and I'd be very surprised if tourism businesses aren't already in a place where they know whether they can transition or not. So that seems like a colossal waste of money to me.
So what is it that you actually do need specifically?
Promotion. We need, and look, I appreciate Tourism New Zealand is about to do an amazing, hopefully, campaign to get New Zealanders travelling again, and that's fantastic. We need the ability to be able to target our customer type, and that's extremely tricky when we're desperately trying to keep people. We need, promotional funds, and we have had some opportunities to apply for free activity and things, which we've been successful in, but more of that would be amazing, both for New Zealand and for Australia specifically.
So are you really, hanging a lot of hope on this Trans-Tasman bubble idea?
Yeah, there is definitely a lot hanging on that. An unknown market for us, generally speaking, but I think there'll be a lot of pent-up demand, and a product like ours will be very, very appealing to Australians. So yes, absolutely. Just before you go, how many people do you employ? We normally, at the top of the season, we employ about 90, of which about 35 are permanent at our HQ here in Queenstown. And are you going to have to let some of them go? Have you let any go? We have been very lucky that we've managed to retain all of our HQ staff. A lot of our guides would normally start winding down now because obviously as we head into winter we don't run as many trips. So to date we have managed to retain our entire team, and that is our goal. And that should be the goal for the whole country because these people are hard to find. They're incredible talent, and we've, as I say, 23 years, a lot of our people have been with us for over 10 or 15 years. I don't want to lose those people. They make our business and bring people to this country. Really appreciate your time. That is Wendy van Lieshout, who is the CEO of Active Adventures in Queenstown, and her business, as she said, has been operating for more than 2 decades. Barbers clippers have been running hot and gyms pumping as the country swings into alert level 2. But it's clear some businesses are still waiting for their precious customers to return. Here's our reporter, Robin Martin.
The staff at Shelby's Barber Gang in New Plymouth donned masks and got to work early this morning. And owner-operator Kelvin Wong says they'll be putting in some serious overtime this week.
The reception's been great. You know, it's awesome to see so much support from everyone. Definitely a bit different because we now do bookings as opposed to just being walk-ins. But it's great. I mean, it has to be done.
How's the booking gone? How busy are you?
We're definitely booked up until next week. We've even opened up Sunday, which we usually don't do, just to go with demand because everyone wants their kids to get haircuts before school and whatnot.
TJ Wairiki was certainly happy to be back in the chair, even with the awkward level 2 protocols.
Pretty stoked, eh? My hair's a bit overgrown, so I've been kind of anticipating this moment. But yeah.
How long have you been waiting?
About 6 weeks probably.
So what are you getting done today?
Just a nice mid-skin fade and maybe some off the top, but I'll just leave the fluff.
The eager gym goers at the F45 studio in the same city were issued towels to wipe down equipment as they went through their rotations. But that didn't dim Damien Powell's enthusiasm any.
It's pretty good, eh? Been working out, doing workouts at home, it's just not as much intensity, not the same, so be able to get back in is pretty good.
So what are your goals for this morning?
Just to get in here, get back into it, and, have a good time.
Kirsten had been undertaking a bit of retail therapy in Wellington while waiting for her flu jab.
I think it's busy, not as busy as it usually is, like on a Friday night or something, but there's lots of people around. But everyone seems to be normal. There's no aggression or people purposely avoiding everyone. I think everyone's just kind of in their own bubble and just staying there.
Commuter rail is gearing up in the capital too. But as this man who had come in from Featherston noticed, social distancing isn't an issue.
There were 4 people on the train, on our carriage, so that was fairly safe. I was a bit surprised, but it's a good thing, I guess. It means that everyone's using, like it says, don't use public transport unless you have to.
Face masks will be available on board your flight today. Please ask one of our...
It was a similar story at Nelson Airport, where Sounds Air resumed scheduled passenger services. The first flight in from Wellington offloaded just 1 passenger, while 5 were booked for the return trip. An excited Judy Green was one of them.
I feel like I'm on the first flight to freedom. Off to see my 6-month-old grandson, and my daughter and her husband, of course, is but really missing the wee boy. I missed out some special moments.
Greta Carney is the owner of the Happy Cafe in Napier. She's been open in one form or another for weeks.
The level 2 is like another request to pivot, and I think that as a business owner there's just been so much pivoting that at this point it's a bit exhausting.
Ms Garney is picking trade will take a while to pick up. In central Dunedin, the owner of the Nova Cafe, Nicole McPherson, reckon things are still a bit quiet.
It's been good. We've had a few regulars in, which has been nice, so it's nice to see some faces and some people around.
And you've got a pretty good view of the Octagon from here.
We do.
What's the trickle of people been like?
It's actually been pretty quiet for the Octagon, so hopefully it'll start picking up around about 9ish or thereabouts.
So certainly not what you're used to seeing it?
Definitely not, no.
Meanwhile, West End Stories and Christchurch's CBD served up 5 breakfast bookings this morning. Manager Bonnie Atkinson says that's quieter than a normal Thursday morning, but it's early days yet.
I have spoken to quite a few people around, and I know that quite a few people are coming back. I think a lot of people are coming back on Monday as well. So then I think we'll just use these few days, see how they go, and then adjust accordingly. But I know that a lot of people are coming back next week.
One of the first customers through the door was engineer Simon Weaver. He's been getting by on click and collect bacon and egg wraps during level 3, but today it was a sit-down big breakfast. But he says being able to dine in isn't just about the food.
Well, it's probably everything, because part of it's the social experience, and when it's work related, we're sitting here talking about our jobs and gearing up for the day, and some of the most important conversations probably happen over breakfast.
Back in New Plymouth, the owner-operator of the Lunchbox Bakery, Filed Sock, had opened up for the first time since the lockdown. He would have been happy with any custom.
This morning, so far, it's very quiet, almost like a weekend. We're hoping busy. That's what we come here for. and it's not happened.
Mr. Sok, like many other small businesses, is hoping trade will pick up next week when schools return and more people venture out of their home offices and return back into town. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ponei, ko Robin Martin Aho.
A lot of you have been getting in touch about tourism and what there was for tourism in the budget. This person says, I think Calvin Davis touched on a few truths. The government can't and shouldn't use our tax dollars to endlessly prop up our tourism industry after COVID. The likely impacts of climate change in the coming decades means that international tourism is never going to be a sustainable industry and is not a great investment. Paul, who is a mountain guide from Wanaka, says he's been guiding for 30 years. I'm very grateful for the extension to the wage subsidy, he says. It's been a very welcome package. I think putting money into promoting domestic tourism is the right move in the short term. I still don't expect my work prospects to improve rapidly, he says, and like everyone else in New Zealand, are in for the long haul. I'll probably do some volunteer work in my community to help support others who are struggling. Our current tourism minister has been careful and prudent, says Paul. Stay strong. New Zealand tourism will change in New Zealand, perhaps for the better. Don has got in touch about our interview with Simon Bridges and says Simon Bridges is keen to point out that it is easy to spend money, but it has to be paid back. Weren't National the ones objecting when Labour was doing exactly that under Dr Cullen? John Key was forever on his feet in Parliament, says Don, saying tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. And this one, I do feel for Calvin Davis. It is heartbreaking that so many people in New Zealand are affected by tourism. And I'm positive he feels this weight. It will not be the last industry to be wiped out by something that is completely out of anybody's control. He could shout at the top of a mountain for the industry, but there's so many things that are out of his hands. He can't magic up international tourists. He has to put people's lives first domestically. Thank you for joining us today when we had our pandemic budget and our first day at level 2. Back tomorrow.
Nights on RNZ National. I'm Brian Crump and I thought I'd better jump in because we don't seem to have contact right now with the news booth in Auckland.